In Johannesburg, at the end of every year, when it gets toward the holidays, the vacation, Johannesburg empties out, and half of the population heads down to a city called Durban. And Durban has these beautiful beaches that look a lot like Southern California. And the surfing there is amazing. They've held the world championships for surfing there many times. But when I was 10 years old, I wasn't interested in surfing. I was interested in surfing concrete sidewalks. I was a skateboarder. And I can remember one day in this little town called Margate, which is part of Durban near the sea, there was a path leading up to a set of 6 or 7 steps. And I was about probably this tall at the time. I was this tiny little kid that the other skaters called Mighty Mouse. And I looked at the set of 6 steps, and that would have been the biggest jump that I had ever made on a skateboard, so I had to try it. Now you can imagine, when you're standing on a skateboard, you are side on to the direction that you're going. So you'll either stand like this, or depending on which side of your body you work with, you'll stand facing the other way. So here I was, facing to the set of steps like this. And I knew I had to get enough speed to jump all 6 of these steps. Now, if you land dead straight, you're fine. If you land a little bit this way, you're still fine because you can kind of correct. However, if you land this way, you have problems in life and they're coming suddenly. The first time I ever tried this, there I am, I've got my skateboard, I've got a 10-meter run-up, so I get as much speed as I can. The speed is good, so I commit to it. Get there to the last second, I make the jump, and I land this way. Oh. Now, what happens when you land this way is that the wheels effectively stop. They lock up when they land. You don't know this is going to happen until you get to the bottom of the staircase. So the wheels locked up, I fell onto my back, and I progressed for about 2 feet in that direction. The skin on my back stayed at the beginning, and I went that way. My memory of that was of lying there crying my little 10-year-old eyes out, and then this big burly lifeguard, no shirt, suntanned, blonde hair, comes down, picks me up, takes me through to the emergency room and goes, "Dude, that was awesome." Now, when you get older, that sort of thing is enough to put you off very quickly. You become afraid of failure. You become afraid of the injury. You never try these things again. But 2 days later, I was already trying to get back onto that skateboard. 10 years old, and the injury can't stop you. It actually did hold me back for a couple of weeks, because every time I started to move, things would tear and bleed back there. But it's funny how, as a young person, when you yearn for something, you are willing to bleed for your craft. And it turns out, all these years down the line, I've started reading a lot of books on how talent works, and I've been studying the idea. And a lot of these books agree that there is a simple formula to talent, and it goes like this. The first part is yearning. Without the yearning, you have no access to growing your talent in anything. And that explains, for example, why I was so good at skateboarding and so bad at maths at school. There was no love of it, there was no yearning. Because as human beings, we are meaning-seeking creatures. We want to know why we're investing time in something. We're not wired to simply carry out a task that has no particular meaning for us, something that we don't love and yearn for. So yearning is the first part of the equation. But now, even with all the yearning in the world, your talent can only get so far. You need the second part of that formula, and that is input. Now, input can come in one of 2 forms. You can either go and do research on a topic, which is very basic, but it works, or you can have a coach or a mentor show you how. Both are effective, but the second one is more effective. It's more effective to have someone work with you and say, try this, adjust in the following way, and actually work you through the things that you're trying to do. So, yearning plus input plus deliberate practice sustained. Now that's the whole formula. I'll work you through the entire thing. Yearning plus input plus deliberate practice sustained. So, what is deliberate practice? Interestingly, it is subtly different to what most of us think of when we think of practice. If there's anyone in the room who plays golf, you might know that you can play golf for 10 years and not get any better. In fact, it's entirely possible to play golf for 10 years and get slightly worse. And there are reasons for that. You see, what most people think of as practice is going to a golf course on a Saturday and playing a game. Now, it turns out that's not the same thing as deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is when you take a thing and break it down into its smallest parts. Then you get better at each part and build it back up again. So take the golf example. Tiger Woods takes a ball, chucks it into a bunker, and spends 3 hours working on how to get a ball out of the sand. And that's it, nothing else. Once he feels that he's mastered that, he goes on to something else and works it out and works on it piece by piece. Now, we're a public speaking crowd, and that presents a bit of a problem for us, because how do you do deliberate practice when every speech you do is live? It's like a game of golf. Well, it turns out, if we're clever about it, there are ways of short-circuiting the system. You see, the worst thing that we can do is every single speech we do, we stand up in front of an audience and do the entire speech. It is a form of practice, but it's not deliberate practice. What we want to do is break it down into its smallest parts. I'm going to give you an exercise that you can try for that. You won't have to try it in the room, but I'll do it and show you how it works. Basically, it goes like this. You take out the words and you count. And you count using different emotions and different body language. You count using different variations on your voice tone. Why the counting? Well, it's an excuse to make sounds, but you don't have to think about the content that you're delivering. So in the same way that a piano practitioner might practice scales with their fingers up and down the keyboard over and over again, this is our opportunity to practice the scales of public speaking. So, you might get a mirror in a room, walk up to the mirror and do a dramatic opening, which might go something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you do a dramatic pause and you look at yourself in the mirror and you think, that looks pretty cool. And then you get into the body of your presentation. You start using body language. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then you get into emotion as though you're telling a story. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10. Then you start getting really dramatic and you play with emotions. Let's do a little bit of anger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then how about sadness? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I know it, right? And it fixes all sorts of problems for us. I worked with a guy who had a little bit of a habit of riding up on his toes like this when he spoke. And he was so focused on what he was saying that he wasn't aware of the body language. I put a mirror in front of him and I said, count to 5 like that. And I ran him through the exercise. He stands in front of the mirror and he goes, 1, 2. Oh, do I do that? Problem solved, fixed instantly. And there are all sorts of things that it helps you to do. For example, in Toastmasters we're taught that when you're speaking, you leave your hands at your sides and bring them up to gesture. Now, I don't know about you, but the first time I tried that, that felt horribly unnatural. I wanted to either clasp my hands, or keep them in motion, or do the fig leaf position, or something. And when you see it in the mirror, when you give yourself the opportunity to break it down into its parts, and you actually view it, you start to realize it looks fine. And you develop that muscle memory so that it becomes natural. And that's the whole point of this idea of deliberate practice. You break a thing down into its smallest parts, and then you build it back up again. What do you want to work on? Do you want to work on your voice, your body language, the way you stand and move about, your personal presence? You can do it all by breaking it down into its smallest parts and working on that. Add it all back together and you become good at what you do. Another brilliant book that came out very recently and has been doing incredibly well, it's a difficult read, but well worth your while, is Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yes.
Anyone read that one?
Yes.
Brilliant, brilliant book. It makes a great many points about how the human mind works. But one of them, and it's fascinating to us, is that when you have to really concentrate on something, that's when you're learning. When you just react with an answer without having to think, there's not much development going on there. So the act of slowing a thing down and focusing on the problem is actually how we develop talent. So that is the formula. It is yearning. You've got to have the love for the thing. And in fact, that's an important one. Start by teaching your children to love a thing before you show them how to do it. Start with the yearning. Without that in place, your talent can only go so far. Yearning plus input, the how-to, the information, the knowledge, the guidance, the coaching. Plus deliberate practice, breaking it down, building it up, and then the final one, sustained over time. So in other words, you have to keep on doing it. There is conventional wisdom as to how much time, and it has entered the public consciousness. Anyone know how long it takes to become a master at anything? What's the accepted norm?
10,000 hours.
10,000 hours, which translates into about 10 years. And it's borne out by study after study after study. And isn't that depressing? But folks, here's the part that I always think about, and I think this is remarkably important. 10,000 hours or 10 years will make you masterclass level at something. It will make you one of the best in the world at something. 3,000 hours will make you pretty darn good. And that's worth remembering. Because we look at this 10,000 hours like this mountain to climb, a full decade of our lives. Well, hang on a second, that's to become one of the best in the world. You can be one of the best nationally with 3,000 or 4,000 hours under your belt. Absolutely true. 10,000 hours or roughly 10 years worth of practice. Now here's something interesting. Let's reverse the formula and find out where the dangers are. So if the formula is yearning plus input plus deliberate practice sustained, what's the opposite? If we switch those words around, we get meaninglessness. So something that means nothing to us. Without the meaning, without the understanding of why this matters, we are dealing with the anti-talent formula. So meaninglessness plus isolation. In other words, don't get any information, don't get any coaching, don't read any books, don't attend any courses. Meaninglessness plus isolation plus winging it, which is the opposite of deliberate practice, just winging it, sustained over time. That's a great formula for dampening and crushing your talent. And it's one worth remembering, because we see that kind of thing often in, say, the corporate world, we see it in the educational world, where those elements come up, and they are dampeners to talent. So that's the opposite of how talent might work. Now, what actually happens in your brain as you are developing talent? They've recently discovered that we basically grow a substance called myelin. Myelin grows in the brain when we practice something, anything. Say, for example, you're practicing how to type on a keyboard, or as a soccer player, you're practicing how to bounce a ball on your foot. The more you repeat, the more your brain grows the substance called myelin. And myelin is basically like sheathing for the neurons in your mind. And the way that it works is that it's like growing thicker and bigger tubes for messages to get through. In fact, the way to think of it is it's like growing broadband for your brain. The more you practice something, the quicker the messages can get through in your mind. And that, physiologically speaking, is what's actually happening. And it's a fascinating thing to think about, because take public speaking. The first time you stand in front of an audience, it's almost like there's too little electricity trying to run too many appliances. So it's like you're standing in front of an audience and trying to remember, body language. And then you remember eye contact. I must do eye contact. And then you realize you've forgotten what you were saying halfway through your sentence, so you focus on that again. And then you notice that someone is falling asleep in the audience, and that's all you can think about. And then you realize I must concentrate on body language again. And then it occurs to you that you should be using your stage, and you struggle to think your way through everything fluently. Now what happens is the more myelin you develop, the more messages are getting through. And after 10 years of Toastmasters, 10 years of speaking, you can be standing up here, mentally undressing somebody in the audience, thinking about your message, using the stage, concentrating on how the audience is reacting, and thinking about what you're wanting to say next. Everyone's wondering who I'm undressing in the audience. It could be you. But that's what happens when the myelin grows. It becomes quicker and it becomes easier. And the net result for you is that you feel less stress. when you do things. Because more electricity, more mental power, more messaging is moving around at quicker speeds in your brain. So the growth of myelin is the goal, and deliberate practice is how we actually go about doing it. Now, the reason that young children learn languages faster than older people is that when you're younger, myelin grows more easily, which is not to say that it doesn't grow when you're older. It's just that we have a harder time at it. So we have to work harder to learn a new language or learn a new skill. But it's no excuse, we can still do it. The myelin works, it takes more stimulation. And of course, the reverse then is true. If you want your children to be incredibly talented at something, start young. Start young. And in fact, that brings us to the first of our myths around what talent is. The idea of the child prodigy, the overnight success story, the genius who just appeared out of nowhere. Folks, study after study is saying that there's basically no such thing. The 10,000-hour rule pretty much applies to everyone, even when we study the great child prodigies of history. Think about the world of classical music. Who's the child prodigy? Mozart. Yeah. There was a wonderful movie called Amadeus. If you haven't seen it, it's beautifully made and very, very well done. And it picks up on Mozart in his sort of early 20s as this wild, eccentric character who is also a genius. And apparently he was a lot like that. But now there are two versions of the Mozart story. And both are true, but we need to hear them both to get the full picture. The first version of the story goes like this. When Mozart was 7, 8 years old, he was playing music for crowned heads of state all around Europe. When he was in his teens, he wrote his first full-scale opera. Anyone here write a full-scale opera in their teens? No, me neither. Right. When he was 21, he wrote one of the most famous pieces of music of all time. And he died, I think it was around the age of 33, if I remember correctly. And one of our great geniuses of all time, one of the greatest musicians we've ever seen, passed away from this earth. Now that version of the story is true, but it's not the whole picture. We have to go back to before Mozart was born. He had a father who was also a composer of music. And just when Mozart was born, his father quit teaching and decided that he was going to focus on making young Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart a musical genius. Do you think that might have helped? Yeah. So from the age of 2, he started receiving in-depth coaching. That's the input part. Now the yearning part is already there because daddy's doing it, so I want to do it too. Yearning plus input. Now it's absolutely true that he started writing his own music at around the age of 6, 7, 8 years of age. But here's what we're not told. It wasn't entirely original. He would take other famous composers' music and rearrange it in different ways. Still pretty impressive. Then his dad would write down the musical annotation. Okay, it's not quite what we were told. Yes, he did write his first full-scale opera in his teens, and it was terrible. Absolutely awful. It is never composed, it is never performed and played today, because it's considered dreadful music. The first thing that he ever did that was really considered top-notch, high-level, premium Mozart was when he was 19 years old. After only 2 decades of intensive coaching and practice. Now, that changes the picture quite radically. And you see it when you examine other people in similar scenarios, like take a Tiger Woods. We also see him as a child prodigy. His story is almost identical to Mozart's. 2, 3 years old, his dad starts teaching him how to play golf. Intensive training program every single day. Gets into his teens, and people go, wow, overnight success. What they're missing is the decade of training that came before that. There is apparently no such thing as a child prodigy overnight success. But it's wonderful once you put in 10 years of work for people to go, wow, he came out of nowhere. Yeah? They don't see the work that went in behind the scenes. There's another myth that comes out of the world of talent, and that is that we are talented because of our family. For example, you might see a family who are incredibly good at singing. Every holiday they get together and they enthrall the rest of the family by forming a choir and singing beautifully together, and you think, well, talent must be genetic, because it's the same family and they're all good at it. No, it's not. It's more like tribal, because they're all living in a family that practices singing every single day. We're only seeing the end result, and we're almost misdiagnosing what talent is. And that's why, among certain groups of people, you might have incredible superstars at a certain type of sport, or incredible superstars at a certain type of music. It's not genetic, it's the tribe, it's the group, it's the people who love that thing. And they share their love with the younger generation, and they teach and they coach and they raise them up. That's what's actually happening there. Talent equals yearning, plus input, plus deliberate practice, sustained. Once we have it in place, and once we've grown the myelin, talent helps us to see meaningful chunks of information. Now, this is quite an abstract one. Let me explain what I mean by this. They took a chess master, and they put a board in front of him, and they arranged the pieces into a half, as though they were halfway through a game. And they let the chess master look at the board for 2 seconds, and then he had to turn his back. Then they took an ordinary person off the street, and they let that person look at the board for like 10 seconds and turn their back. Your average person can remember where 7 pieces are. The chess master can remember all of them. Now that doesn't seem remarkable to us. We go, okay, the person obviously has this great memory. No, that's not what's happening. Because they then take the pieces and they arrange them in a way that doesn't make sense in a chess game. In other words, pieces are where they cannot logically be in a real game of chess in the real world. Then they let the chess master look at it for 3 seconds, they let someone else look at it for the same period of time, and both of them could remember only 7 pieces. So what's going on there? Well, the first time the chess master looks at it, the chess master is not memorizing where things are. The chess master is looking at a scenario that he or she recognizes. It's like reading a language. They don't have to remember where pieces are. They see a whole situation. That's what's going on. Now, we can use that in all sorts of things. We can use that in the world of sales. We can use it in the world of leadership, of public speaking. Basically, the more talented you become, the more you can look at a scenario and read it. And that is a valuable skill. So let's take a simple example. Let's say that 2 people from the same company go on a sales call to another company. So let's say that you've got the older guy who's the mentor to the young man. They will both arrive at the company at the same time. The young man looks at the building and goes, nice building. The older gentleman looks at the building and he can see 5 things about the culture of this company just by looking at it. They walk through the door and they are greeted by the receptionist. The young man just thinks he's been greeted. The older person can see something politically about what's going on. Just read it because of the talent. They walk into a room, sit down, and the people that they're speaking to filter into the room, sit down around them, they make the introductions, and the young man hasn't noticed anything. The older person can see exactly what the scenario is in that room and change things and be agile because of it. It's like looking at that chess match. The person is reading a scenario. So it allows us to see meaningful chunks. It also allows us to see patterns in advance, which is very similar. When 2 professionals play tennis, you look at the speed at which the ball goes across the court. And when you measure the time from when a ball leaves a racket to when it arrives on the other side, you have to come to the conclusion that it's impossible to react that quickly. It's like 1 second or less from one end of the court to the other. And you think, how on earth can you get your arm up and swing a racket in time to hit that ball and know where it is? Well, it turns out that they don't. They are no faster than you or I. There's something else going on. You see, what the tennis player is doing is he's looking at his opponent. Guy throws the ball up into the air, and as he starts to move like this, that guy can tell where the ball's going to go. Because he has had so much experience with this that he can read a pattern coming in advance. Now, we can use that in sales, in leadership, in public speaking. The more myelin we develop, the more deliberate practice we get, the more we see the patterns. I have a simple analogy that I use for comfort zones, and I think this is quite a cool one. Let's imagine that your comfort zone represents 3 concentric circles around you. So you're standing in the middle, and that is the comfort zone. The next circle around you is the growth zone. The one beyond that is the trauma zone. So what we want to do is we want to push ourselves in small increments. And I think this is possibly what goes wrong quite often in public speaking. The first time someone ever tries it, they go beyond just that little bit of discomfort, right smack into trauma. Your first speech can't be an important 60-minute address in front of 10,000 people. It's not going to work. And in fact, the same, of course, applies to children. You've got to take them slightly out of their comfort zone. Something that stretches them a little, but it's attainable. And then they get that little bit of confidence. They can go a little bit further. So, unless you're out of the comfort zone, you're not growing. If you're too far out in one go, you're actually doing more damage than good. More and more studies that are looking at how genius works seem to indicate that genius is really just the ability to stick at something a little bit longer than what most people would. Now that's quite simple. That's a matter of willpower. That's a matter of choice. You can, in fact, develop yourself to genius levels just by knowing that principle. It's the difference between someone sitting down and looking at a problem and after 5 minutes giving up, versus someone who is, for all intents and purposes, no more intelligent, staying a little bit longer, struggling through, and eventually getting it right. They say that's one of the major differences between the average person and geniuses, the ability to struggle a little bit longer. Now, what happens when you get to the point where something is fun, it's easy, it's automatic? I wonder if you've ever had this experience, those of you who drive. You get into your car in the morning, you arrive at work, and you can't even remember driving there.
Yep.
Ever happened? Yeah? It's probably happened in other spheres of life as well, where you've got to do a thing. You get to the end of it and you kind of can't remember doing it. It just happened. Now what's happened there is you've hit a talent cap. You've gotten to a plateau in your talent. A thing has become automatic. If you don't do something about it, you will not become any more talented. It's like the golf game. You can play for 10 more years and not get any better. So how do you push past a talent plateau? You've got to make it hard again, is the simple answer. So let's take driving a car. If you've gotten to the point where it's automatic and you don't even think about it, now you've got to try things that are hard enough that you do have to think about it. And that might mean learning things like a dramatic J-turn that you see in the Hollywood movies, skidding into a parking spot, or going on an advanced driving course and going around circles at 180 kilometers sideways. Whatever it takes to make you think about what you're doing again. But when it becomes automatic, you have hit a talent cap. Now folks, for you or I, that works it's just as real in the world of public speaking. If you get to the point where it is now easy and automatic, you have reached a talent cap. If you're okay with how good you are, great. But if you want to become better, it's got to be hard again. You've got to find ways to push yourself and make it difficult in order to grow the myelin. Find ways to challenge yourself, whatever that might be, whether it's telling more complicated stories, including more humor, remembering to do more things, whatever the case might be. Get back to the point where you're struggling, and therefore you will be growing again. Now, one step beyond the development of talent is the idea of aspiring to absolute greatness. How do we go beyond just being good at something? We've got the myelin, we've got the ability, we've become fairly automatic and natural at a thing. How do we go to the highest levels in any endeavor? Well, for that one, we're going to have to revisit our friend from yesterday, the wise Austrian philosopher, Arnold Schwarzenegger. When Arnold was in his early 20s, he made an interesting decision, and it's been his philosophy all of his life. You see, he realized that he couldn't be a bodybuilder living in Austria. He had to move to the United States where bodybuilding was the big thing. And he went to California, but he went with a very specific plan in mind. And this was his goal before he even moved. The goal was to meet the top bodybuilders in the world and to study how much weight they use, how many sets they do, how many repetitions they do, not in order to equal them, but in order to exceed them. Now folks, that is an interesting shift in mindset. Who's your hero? Who's your role model? Who's the person that you most deeply and dearly desire to be like? Have you ever thought as far as how could I outperform that person? Because think about it this way, if our goal is only to imitate someone, the best we can ever be is a pale comparison of that person. But when we start studying what they do with the goal of exceeding them, A, we're giving ourselves a lot more work, but B, we are relentlessly driving our development of talent. That is an incredible way to think, and that really is the key to the next level after simply becoming good at something. Who's your idol? Who's your star? Have you studied what they do? Could you outperform them? It is absolutely possible. I think the mistake a lot of young people make is they look at the lifestyle of their stars and they go, I want a piece of that. For you or I, if we want to get this right, we need to study the struggle of the star. What did it take to get there? That's where the real answers lie. And of course, that's where the real work lies as well. Boiled right down, the starting point of talent is very simple. It's passion. It's yearning, it's desire, it's love for the thing. Human beings are meaning-seeking creatures. We don't do something and we can't sustain effort unless there's a reason for it. And when there is a reason for it, when we buy into it, when we love it, when we believe in it, we go the extra mile in a thing. Talent equals yearning, plus input, plus deliberate practice, sustained over time. Do it long enough, do it hard enough, and with enough focus, you grow the myelin in your brain, it becomes automatic, and you can become a top-level performer at anything. Thanks for your time.
Everybody from the man who's made of myelin, Douglas Kruger.